The Gabby Petito case is the highest profile case to have ever been solved with the help of the internet. But now, years later, although the case has long been closed, Reddit users have reasons to believe that it shouldn't be, that there are certain people involved in the case whose hidden crimes have still gone unpunished. On September 11th, 2021, police investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Gabby Petito arrived at her fiancé's family home in Northport, Florida, looking for answers. They didn't have a warrant, but they wouldn't need one to see what was parked in the driveway. A white 2012 Ford Transit, the same van that Gabby had converted into a DIY camper for her road trip across the United States with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. When questioned by investigators, Brian's parents, despite having possession of Gabby's vehicle, insisted that they had no knowledge of where their future daughter-in-law was. They did, however, know where their son was. He was home. This was a shock to the police. Why was Brian here with Gabby's camper van but not Gabby? When the officers asked if they could talk to Brian, his parents just handed them the contact information of the family's lawyer and told them to contact him instead. Without a warrant, the police could do nothing but leave with more questions than they had come with. Why did the Laundries have a lawyer all of a sudden? What were they hiding? But the police weren't the first to find the Laundries suspiciously uncooperative. The day prior, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, who at this point was starting to panic after not hearing from her daughter for 2 weeks, texted Brian's mother, Roberta Laundrie, asking if Gabby was okay. The message showed read, but no one replied. Nicole found it extremely strange, but gave Roberta the benefit of the doubt that maybe she was caught up in something. But eventually, when she texted again to follow up on her last message, her message was green. She had been blocked. Roberta had seen the texts, but was purposely ignoring them, and now she had cut off communication entirely. But why? Gabby's father tried to message Brian's parents too, and even his sister, Cassie, but he heard nothing in response. Joe finally warned them that if they didn't respond, he'd be forced to call the police. But even after that threat, Brian's family remained silent. This was extremely concerning. In 2019, when Gabby had introduced Brian to her parents, they were supportive. He seemed quiet but complimentary to Gabby's vibrant personality. However, when she mentioned moving in with him at his parents' house in Northport, Florida, they hesitated. They tried to reason with her that this all seemed too quick, but Gabby had made up her mind. Eventually, the parents had to respect their daughter's wishes and let her go. Finally, in December 2019, after 9 months of dating, Gabby packed up her life in New York and moved more than 1,000 miles south to start a new chapter in Florida with Brian and his parents. And now, Gabby's parents were being kept in the dark about their daughter's well-being and whereabouts by the very people they had entrusted to protect her. Nicole turned to the internet for help. She made a "Where's Gabby" poster using the last picture from Gabby's trip and shared it on Facebook. Gabby had already gathered a decent Instagram following by this point, from regularly posting about their travels, and when her missing post surfaced, it circulated fast. The next day, on September 11th, Gabby's parents filed a missing persons report with the police in New York and reached out to all the parks on the West Coast to gather any information on her daughter's possible whereabouts, but they had nothing for her. Meanwhile, in Florida, after calling the Laundrie's house multiple times with no answer, the police in Northport, Florida paid the family a visit. That's when police discovered that not only was Brian back, but he had been since September 1st. When Gabby's parents learned that Brian had been home with the van and not Gabby for the past 10 days, they immediately requested that the police seize their daughter's van. The Laundries had no choice but to comply. On September 12th, the FBI opened an investigation into Gabby's disappearance. They collaborated with federal, state, and local officials to do a wide search in the areas where Gabby was last known to have been: the Grand Teton National Park and the Bridger Teton National Park in Wyoming. The following day, Gabby's parents held a press conference in which they revealed some distressing details about the couple's travel timeline. Gabby's father, Joe, confirmed that he knew she had been in Utah on August 21st because there had been a power outage that day, causing Wi-Fi to go down, and he had to order Uber Eats for her and Brian. Then, after spending 2 days in Salt Lake, the couple had gone to the Grand Teton National Park, where Gabby FaceTimed her parents on August 25th. That was the last time they had heard her voice. Gabby last texted her mother on August 27th. There was no contact for the next 3 days, despite Nicole constantly trying to reach her. But then, on August 30th, she received a text from Gabby's phone. "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." To anyone, that text might have been a reassurance that everyone was alright, yet it was the opposite for Gabby's mom. Stan was Gabby's grandfather, but Gabby would never call him by his name. It had always been Grandpa since she was little. Nicole shared her concern. The last text I got from her was on August 30th. I don't know if that was her texting me or not. The press conference got nationwide public attention, and seeing how there was no specific subreddit dedicated to Petito's search, Redditors created Gabby Petito. The community quickly grew to 90,000 in just a week. The moderators of the subreddit were taken aback by such an intense public interest in a missing person case. This is absolutely the fastest case of growth I have ever seen on Reddit for any type of missing person case, said a moderator. It was made with the objective of assisting the FBI in the search for the missing young woman, and quickly became a platform to discuss the case, compile information, and, as it is often inevitable for Redditors to do, speculate. And the focal point of said speculation began with the utter silence from Brian's family. Their outright refusal to provide any answers provoked bouts of people to protest outside the Laundrie's residence. They shouted and demanded Brian to come outside and tell them where Gabby was. But despite being on the receiving end of so much public criticism, the Laundries remained uncooperative. There were Redditors who tried to present reasons to explain their strange behavior, like how their attorney must have advised them to practice the Fifth Amendment. But those said reasons were countered quickly. Yes, he has the right to remain silent. That doesn't mean people can't be suspicious of him, because as of now, he clearly doesn't care about Gabby being found, either dead or alive. Especially given the fact that Brian was the only one who could give information on Gabby's whereabouts. And as such, on September 15th, Brian was officially declared a person of interest involved in Gabby's disappearance. In response to this, his lawyer released a statement that immediately circulated on Reddit. Many people are wondering why Mr. Laundrie would not make a statement or speak with law enforcement in the face of Miss Petito's absence. In my experience, intimate partners are often the first person law enforcement focuses their attention on in cases like this, and the warning that any statement made will be used against you is true, regardless of whether my client had anything to do with Miss Petito's disappearance. As such, on the advice of counsel, Mr. Laundrie is not speaking on this matter. As one can imagine, the public's reaction to Bertolino's message wasn't positive. That's some terrible damage control. Exactly, it's making him look so bad. It's so insensitive to the family, and the wording is ambiguous. Not even definitively saying my client does not know where she is and has no information that could help the investigation. It's basically saying a big F you to anyone reading it. In a way, I'm okay with him not speaking. Without him muddying the waters with lies and manipulations, law enforcement can focus on things like their digital trails, eyewitness accounts, etc. From the comments, one thing was clear. Brian had always been a person of interest for Redditors, so this official labeling didn't really change much. Obviously, getting a lawyer isn't the problem, it's his complete lack of desire to find his fiancée. Although direct communication had become nearly impossible between the two families, Gabby's parents found another way to get a message across. On September 16th, Petito family's lawyer publicly read a letter addressed to Brian's parents in front of the media. We believe you know the location where Brian left Gabby. We beg you to tell us. As a parent, how could you let us go through this pain and not help us? As a parent, how could you put Gabby's younger brothers and sisters through this? It is not confirmed whether the letter was mailed to the Laundries or not, but them reading it out loud in front of the world most likely forced the silent family to listen regardless. Please, if you or your family has any decency left, please tell us where Gabby is located. Tell us if we are even looking in the right place. Gabby's family's intentions weren't to attack or accuse, but rather a request for cooperation and consideration. We understand you are going through a difficult time, and your instinct to protect your son is strong. We ask you to put yourselves in our shoes. We haven't been able to sleep or eat, and our lives are falling apart. Gabby lived with you for over a year. She was going to be your daughter-in-law. How can you keep her location hidden? And the letter concluded with, all we want is Gabby to come home. Please help us make that happen. That same day, after the press conference, body cam footage was released by the Moab City Police Department. It was from August 12th, 15 days before Gabby's disappearance, and it showed two officers pulling over her van in Moab, Utah. The officers in question were Danielle Robbins and Eric Pratt. They had apparently received a 911 call reporting a man hitting a woman outside of a white van in front of a food spot named Moonflower. The first thing the cops did was separate the two and question them individually about what happened. The body cam footage showed a visibly disturbed Gabby shaking and crying, and a calm Brian. Out of respect for Gabby and her family, we will not be showing any footage of Gabby in distress. We've just been fighting this morning. Some personal issues, Gabby said, clearly struggling to explain the situation fully. Then, Brian tried to explain the scratch on his face.
I know I shouldn't push it. I was just trying to push your way to go. Let's just take a minute, step back and breathe, and receive.
Gabby admitted to striking Brian and described how she has OCD and was very stressed at the moment. I was just cleaning and straightening up back at the end before, and I was apologizing to him and saying I'm sorry that I'm so mean because sometimes I have OCD and sometimes I just get really frustrated. Instead of probing further, the officers decided to just separate the two for the night. The footage hit social media like a wildfire, and many criticized the way the cops handled the situation. If the police officers on 812 ruled this as a mental health crisis, why was the solution to send her off to sleep in her van alone for the night? Why wouldn't a potential visit to the hospital be offered? There were no further follow-ups after the couple was reunited despite the obvious signs that something wasn't right, all because they reported it as a mental health crisis rather than a domestic abuse case. However, there were some Redditors who speculated that Brian was the real victim. The relationship seems unhealthy, and you can't ignore the scratches he has. He appears cooperative, but regardless, his silence now is the biggest issue. Even if he was trying to get away from a mutually toxic situation, he refuses to tell anyone what happened. Her family deserves to know the truth. In my opinion, he showed a lot of concern for her. He even offers himself to stay in jail instead of her. If you were willing to do that for someone, why would you not speak to law enforcement when that same person goes missing? Although Gabby was identified as the main aggressor, that did not back what the initial caller had said, a man hitting the woman. Not to mention the footage mainly covered Brian's say on the matter. Much of Gabby's side of the story seemed to be missing. To most Redditors, the way she was taking all the blame and constantly belittling herself stood out. Gabby does not show psychopathic characteristics. She is not concerned with how she is being perceived and says things about herself that paint her in a bad light. That's what I picked up on too. He is really putting on a charming act to sway how he is being perceived. Like how he's apologizing over and over. I have a feeling Gabby probably snapped from him being emotionally abusive. Redditors replayed the scene frame by frame, dissecting every movement, every word. They knew there was more to the story, and were going to stop at nothing before the complete truth was revealed. Then it clicked. There were two officers, so there should be two sources of body cam footage. Where was Officer Pratt's body cam footage, and why was it not shared with the public as well? Theories spiraled across the platform as people called out the Moab Police Department for hiding the truth. What was in that second source of footage that they didn't want the public to see? The former Grand County prosecutor, Happy Morgan, wasn't going to let it slide so easily. She publicly accused the Moab Police Department of a possible cover-up, suggesting that withholding the second officer's footage could point to something far more serious than just the poor handling of a routine stop. The resulting silence and dismissive attitude of the Moab police only solidified the accusation that they were indeed hiding the complete story. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Brian's family dropped a bombshell. On September 17th, the Laundries called the police to report that Brian, the sole person who might be able to pinpoint Gabby's location, was missing. The news exploded on Reddit. Saying Brian is missing is lenient and excusing of his responsibility to this case. He's eluding accountability. I think we all know it's obvious that he has fled. What was even more alarming was that Brian had left his phone and wallet at home. People questioned how the authorities, who until now have been under the impression that he was still at the house, could have let the prime suspect slip through their fingers like this. Turns out, the investigators who were in charge of keeping an eye on Brian's movements had made a mistake. 4 days prior, on September 13th, the police had seen Brian drive off in his gray Mustang. 2 days later, they saw him drive it back on September 15th, and thus had confidently reported to the press that Brian was home. Only, turns out it wasn't Brian driving his car back. It was his mom, Roberta, wearing a baseball cap. This raised multiple questions. Where had Brian gone? Why had his mother driven the car back to their house without her son? And if Brian had been missing since the 13th, why were his parents just reporting him now, 2 days after they had taken away his only form of transportation back home? The Laundries claimed he had gone hiking in the nearby Mayakahachi Creek Environmental Park. At the time, they apparently hadn't thought much of it because, according to them, Brian would often go there to unwind for 2 to 3 days at a time. Only this time, he didn't return. Does it feel like there's a lack of be on the lookout for this guy from the police or FBI? Where is all the reporting of police conducting a nationwide manhunt? Am I missing something here? I don't get it. If the cops saw Brian leave on 9/13 in the Mustang and kept a 24/7 visual on the car and its occupants until it came back to the house on 9/15, how can they mistake him for his mom unless the occupants never got out of the car for the entire 2 days? The inconsistencies in the authorities' reports and the Laundries' claims fueled Redditors to speculate on what the actual truth was. I think he told them he murdered her and they helped him anyways. They are, in my mind at least, obviously aiding and abetting him right now. Some parents will do anything to protect their kid. And there were some who asked dangerously blunt questions. What if Brian's parents accidentally killed him after they got into an argument about Gabby? It was later confirmed that Brian's parents had gone to search for him on the 14th when he did not return and found the Mustang parked at Mayakahachi Park. They left it there so Brian could come back. When Brian still didn't return the next day, they went to look for him again, only to find the car still there and now ticketed. To prevent it from being towed, Roberta drove it back to the house on September 15th. It was also revealed that Laundrie's attorney, Bertolino, had actually reported to the FBI on September 14th morning that Brian did not return home. But the FBI, upon seeing the car driven back on 15th, assumed that Brian had come home on his own. The Mayakahachi Park, where Brian had supposedly gone, was no ordinary patch of green. At the edge of the sprawling Carlton Reserve, the terrain was wild, swampy, and vast. Nearly 25,000 acres of untamed Florida wilderness with dense brush, water moccasins, and hungry alligators. It wasn't a place one would simply walk into to unwind. And it definitely didn't look like a place one could walk out of easily. Isn't that the reserve in Florida crawling with gators? Wouldn't it be super hard to wade through there? Not only for Brian, but also for law enforcement when they were thoroughly sweeping it on foot. Yes, gators aren't the worst part, as that is all swamp and what looks like grass is about 3 feet high. Tons of biting bugs and fire ants. One of the local cattle ranchers named Alan McEwen, who had been assisting the authorities in the search for Brian, said, "There's no surviving out here. I don't know how to say it. I've been in the woods in and out all my life. I have learned a lot in my life, and one thing I know is no one is going to survive out there for 2 weeks on foot." Redditors speculated that maybe Brian's parents pointed towards the uninhabitable Carlton Reserves to fake Brian's death and get him out of the spotlight. How do we know he went to the swamp? Are they just taking the parents' words for it, or do they have security footage of him going into the swamp? As the investigators now set on the search for 2 missing individuals, they once again asked the public to share any lead or information to the dedicated tip line. All the internet warriors saw it as a war cry, and the line began receiving 200 to 300 leads per day. But when people begin to favor going viral over authenticity, misinformation can spread like a virus. Social media, already ablaze with speculations, soon became a breeding ground for half-truths and dangerous rabbit holes. TikToks, Reddit threads, and YouTube investigators came forward with conflicting claims. Some swore they'd seen Gabby, some said they saw Brian, a few even insisted they saw them together, hand in hand. It became nearly impossible to tell who was chasing facts and who was chasing clout. And surprisingly, most of those so-called leads ended up at a dead end. But eventually, amidst the crowd, a few voices stood out, with testimony that actually carried weight. A woman named Nina Angelo and her boyfriend, Matt England, described a tense moment they had witnessed inside a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming. It had been August 27th, the last day anyone had heard from Gabby. According to Nina, she went to the Merrey Piglet's Tex-Mex with Matt to grab food, but their attention was immediately caught by a visibly distressed woman crying and apologizing, whereas her partner was pacing in and out of the restaurant in frustration. He was even lashing out at the staff. When Nina saw the case of Gabby and Brian in the media, she immediately recognized them as the disturbed couple from before. The incident had been so disruptive that even the restaurant manager remembered it clearly and confirmed the details to the FBI later on. Another witness named Jessica Schultz shared how on August 26th, a day before the Merrey Piglets incident, she got caught behind an awkwardly slow-moving white van along a road in Grand Teton National Park. When Jessica finally passed it, she saw a plain-looking white man behind the wheel and a straw hat on the dashboard. Then, she saw the same van again on the evening of August 27th and on the 28th, the day after Gabby's last known communication. It was parked at a trail in Spread Creek, which is east of the Grand Teton National Park. She noted that there were no indications that anyone was inside the van. Later, when the Moab body cam footage surfaced and Jessica saw the same straw hat on the van's dashboard, it all clicked. She immediately contacted the FBI and detailed what she had encountered, urging them to look at Spread Creek. Then came August 29th, when Miranda Baker, a college student traveling with her boyfriend, picked up a hitchhiker near Coulter Bay. It was Brian Laundrie, alone. He had offered them $200 for a ride, just up to Jackson. During the journey, he shared with Miranda that he had been camping out there alone for a while. His fiancée was apparently working on their social media content at the van in Jackson. But the moment Miranda mentioned Jackson Hole as her destination instead of Jackson, Brian panicked. He insisted they drop him near Jackson Lake Dam, and the whole encounter ended abruptly. Miranda felt something was definitely wrong, but since she had places to be herself, she didn't think much of it until the news blew up. Meanwhile, another witness testimony showed that Jackson Lake Dam wasn't the end of Brian's hitchhiking. Just after Miranda left, a Wyoming resident named Norma Jean Jalovic pulled over next to him, and he asked for a ride to Jackson once again. However, since Norma was going north, opposite Jackson, Brian insisted on just dropping him off at the Spread Creek campsite. She agreed since it was only a 10-minute drive from there. Brian had mentioned that his fiancée was waiting for him in the van. Throughout the trip, Brian didn't talk much and kept staring at a Bible placed on the dashboard. What added to the weirdness of it all was that the moment Norma reached Spread Creek, even before she entered the park's gate, Brian jumped out. He didn't even wait for the car to fully stop. For some reason, he didn't want Norma to drive all the way into the park. But why? And then, a man named Chris testified. He was another witness who had seen and reported the heated exchange between Gabby and Brian in front of Moonflower Cooperative in Moab, Utah. In a sworn written statement, Chris said, "They were talking aggressively at each other, and something seemed off. At one point, she was punching him in the arm and/or face, and trying to get into the van." Then, the 911 call that led the police to make the traffic stop in Moab was released to the public.
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove.
I can't figure out how the situation got turned around so that she was considered the aggressor. It went from he slapped her to she slapped him? My guess would be that if there was ongoing abuse, she was conditioned to protect him and take the blame. It's just like the police completely disregarded what was said in the 911 call, though, and that's ridiculous. But perhaps the biggest discovery came not from a witness, but from a camera lens. Kyle and Jen Bethune, a traveling couple who documented their journeys on YouTube, were reviewing their footage from late August when they spotted something: a white van parked in Spread Creek. Footage from 6 p.m. on August 27th showed them passing by the white 2012 Ford Transit. This also confirmed Jessica Schultz's sighting of the white van that same evening. The couple immediately uploaded the footage, and it became a pivotal piece of evidence, helping investigators narrow down the area of Gabby's search. The significance of this clue did not go unnoticed by the rest of the internet. You gotta wonder how much of that video of the van's parked location helped narrow the area of search. Really incredible that that footage was found. On the second day of the FBI searching Spread Creek, where the van had been spotted on the dashcam footage, they found something. Off the gravel road was the body of a young woman. She wasn't buried. She wasn't hidden. She was just there. Redditors were among the first to spread the word. While Reddit debated over whether the body found was Gabby or another missing person in the area, please also keep in mind there are other missing people in the area. This may not be GP. I was thinking the same thing. There are several other people missing in the area. There's a good chance it's not her. Can anyone confirm the precise location of where this body was found? It's true, there were other missing people in the area, but they were searching an area where Gabby's van was last seen. It's very likely her. Certainty? No. The officers rang the first call to Jim Schmidt, Gabby's stepfather, who had previously flown to Wyoming to assist in the search. He wasn't shown the body. All they needed to do was describe the sweater she was found in, and he knew it was her. It took him an hour to compose himself before he could relay the news to the rest of the family. That day, the subreddit Gabby Petito went haywire. As grief unfolded in Gabby's house, curiosity raged on the internet. To them, nothing was officially confirmed yet. It's common knowledge that whenever latest updates drop regarding something trending, especially a manhunt, Redditors can be tempted to post first and think later. This is what often leads to the spread of unverified facts and misinformation. Questions kept raging. Who did the body belong to? Was it really Gabby? And if it was, how did she end up there? The official identification finally came via a tweet by the FBI on September 21st. Teton County Coroner Dr. Brent Blue confirmed the remains are those of Gabrielle Venora Petito. Date of birth, March 19th, 1999. Coroner Blue's initial determination for the manner of death is homicide. The cause of death remains pending final autopsy results. Then, FBI later confirmed that Miss Petito died of blunt force injuries to the head and neck with manual strangulation. It was like an official stamp on the thought everyone had since the beginning, but didn't want to admit out loud. Gabby had been killed, and the only person who knew the full story was missing. Not going to be a nice scene outside of the laundry house this evening. My only solace right now is knowing that there's a judge somewhere in Florida right now holding a pen and just waiting to sign that search warrant. But when the entire world is set on finding one person, one would think they cannot stay hidden for long. Brian, time to air your dirty laundry. The next day, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Brian Laundrie. And it wasn't just because he was the last person to be with a murder victim. It had stemmed from a grand jury indictment alleging that Laundrie had violated Federal Statute 18, which is the use of unauthorized access devices. It was revealed that Brian had used Gabby's debit card from August 30th to September 1st to extract a total amount of around $1,000. As the search for the missing Laundrie continued and the internet went on a full-blown manhunt mode, his lawyer, Stephen Bertolino, released another statement on September 27th. Chris and Roberta Laundrie do not know where Brian is. They are concerned about Brian and hope the FBI can locate him. The speculation by the public and some in the press that the parents assisted Brian in leaving the family home or in avoiding arrest on a warrant that was issued after Brian had allegedly been missing for several days is just wrong. It was an attempt to protect Laundrie's parents from the ongoing harassment and accusations, but his words weren't believed by most. The absolute 100% only reason for them to ignore the Petitos begging for their help to find their daughter is if they knew something was amiss and their son was involved. 100%. There is literally no way it can play out where they didn't know anything about anything and still ignored the Petitos. They lied to the police. They harbored him in their home. They helped him escape. They knowingly wasted public resources. They are accessories and should be charged. And then, to top it off, their neighbors came forward to reveal a shocking piece of information. According to them, after Brian returned home with the van alone, the Laundries took him for a camping trip to Fort DeSoto Park in Pinellas County, Florida, from September 6th to 7th, seemingly as if nothing had happened. Redditors did not take that news lightly. I think they went camping to burn evidence, including her cell phone that is still missing. I think he and his parents went camping as a way to set him up a hiding spot. Cash, clothes, etc., then go home, help him sneak away, and then continue their plan by calling to report him missing. The next day, Gabby's family lawyer, Richard Stafford, held a press conference and presented a reply to Laundrie's attorney. The Laundries did not help us find Gabby. They sure aren't going to help us find Brian. For Brian, we are asking you to turn yourself in. He further added that the family was 100% satisfied with the FBI's help in finding their daughter and was very thankful for the help from people on the internet. If it wasn't for the public's pressure and sleuths sharing leads with the FBI, perhaps Gabby would have never been found. Just as Gabby's family was trying to console each other over their loss, another brutal reality surfaced, adding insult to injury. Remember how the body cam footage released by the Moab police was only of Officer Daniel Robbins, and they went silent when asked for the other officers as well? On October 1st, the second source of footage was finally released, and it immediately became clear why they had been so reluctant to hand it over. It showed a more detailed exchange that the cops had with Gabby, something that was clearly missing in the previous video. It showed the officer asking Gabby if the two callers' reports of Brian hitting Gabby were true, to which she responded, I guess, yeah, but I hit him first. Then, to gain clarification, Eric asks her, you slapped him first, and just on his face? The answer came accompanied by sobs. Well, he kept telling me to shut up, but I hit him first. Well, he grabbed my face, I guess. It seemed to many that Gabby was trying to minimize the situation by preventing conflict from escalating. On top of that, she was hyperventilating and crying the entire time, which was not only ignored, but mocked by the cops. They laughed and told Brian they felt bad for him. Brian, who was calm, played the victim card and kept the charming act up. Aside from the disparity in treatment, the visible difference between Gabby and Brian's mental state is what truly irked people. He is 100% a narcissist, and she is clearly abused. She was crying and he was laughing and smiling the whole time. He manipulated and lied to those officers. It actually gave me chills that the cops and Brian got along so well. They were talking like they were buddies catching up, chatting about their careers, and commiserating about the women in their lives. That's not how it's supposed to be. Several people were triggered by the developments in the case, as it reminded them of the trauma they had endured in their own pasts. The behavior I've observed from Brian reminds me of my abusive ex, especially after hearing the story of them at the restaurant in Wyoming on 8/27, where Brian was yelling at the hostess and Gabby was crying and apologizing for his behavior. It's all sad and unfortunately very triggering, which is why I'm so invested. Seeing the negativity spread, several Reddit users tried to console others by sharing supportive resources. For anyone who has been in a manipulative and abusive relationship, I see you, I hear you, I empathize with you. This whole case has been incredibly triggering for me. My heart breaks for Gabby, not only because of her death, but because of the relationship she endured far too long, sending love and light to all survivors and victims. The shared empathy among Redditors was felt by thousands. It reflected why such communities mattered amidst tragedies like this. Meanwhile, Florida's Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, the last place Brian was believed to have gone, was submerged under nearly 3 feet of water after relentless rainstorms, making it almost impossible to track anything or anyone. Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marchino said,
"These are very, very difficult conditions. I mean, you're searching in areas that you just can't walk up and look. It's not like you're searching a house or a car. These areas are huge and they're covered by water."
Despite the grim conditions, law enforcement never stopped looking. Day after day, they searched the unforgiving landscape, but Brian had vanished without a trace. It was as if the land itself had swallowed him whole. The world desperately waited for answers that only Brian could provide. But given the long time supposedly exposed to the elements, not to mention the flooding and dangerous weather, was Brian even alive? Then, everything changed on October 20th. The park was finally reopened to the public, and after weeks of closure due to the flooding, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, Brian's parents, suddenly told law enforcement they wanted to go to the park and assist in their son's search. As they went further into the park, 3 groups were formed. Chris had ventured off the trail and was seen zigzagging around different areas. The FBI was doing the same while Roberta stayed on the trail. And then, a short time later, the cops called over Brian's parents, who were seen holding a dry bag that they didn't have before. The cops showed them something on his phone, and the couple went back home. It was later revealed that shortly after Brian's parents joined the search team, Chris had come across the dry bag 20 feet off the trail. Elsewhere, at around the same time, authorities came across a second bag, which was more water damaged. The officers in the clip were showing them the picture of that water damaged backpack, and the reason he asked them to leave was because the bag was found next to human skeletal remains. There were also a few personal belongings like a wilted notebook, a white metal ring, a pair of green shorts, and a short-barrel revolver handgun with extensive rust. Vegetation had grown around the skeleton, and there was a bullet wound in its skull. FBI Special Agent in Charge Michael McPherson confirmed that the clothing they found on the remains was consistent with what Brian was wearing on the day he left for the hike. The next day, the Sarasota Coroner's Office confirmed that the remains were Brian's, and the death was officially deemed to be self-inflicted. Investigators were now confident that they knew what had happened to Brian, but as for why, they turned to the notebook found with his remains. Inside the notebook was Brian's confession, written in trembling ink and fractured sentences. It was the closest thing to an explanation the world would ever receive. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. rushing back to our car trying to cross the streams of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. Shouted her name. I found her breathing heavily, gasping my name. She was freezing cold. I carried her as far as I could down the streams toward the car, stumbling, exhausted in shock, when my knees buckled and knew I couldn't safely carry her. She had a small bump on her forehead that eventually got larger. Her feet hurt. Her wrist hurt. But she was freezing, shaking violently, begging for an end to her pain. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that it is what she wanted, but I see now all the mistakes I made. I can't stand to live another day without her. Please pick up all of my things. Gabby hated people who litter. If his account of the incident is to be believed, then Gabby's death was not the result of premeditated murder, but rather a mercy killing that she requested in order to save herself from the pain of injuries that were presumably going to bring about the end of her life anyways. But that's just it. Is this the truth? This brings us to the first of multiple unsolved mysteries that Reddit believes still surrounds this case. To them, nothing about that letter makes sense. Redditors were quick to point out the discrepancies between the details in Brian's confession and facts known so far. They were not that far from the van. He also could have called 911. Service was good in that area. It's all a lie. And she was so small. I do not believe that he was unable to carry her out. I know he was not a big guy, but in my opinion, a young, healthy man filled with adrenaline would have been able to carry her out, especially when the injured party is allegedly the love of your life. They were also quick to point out that the additional injuries that Brian writes about were never found in Gabby's autopsy report. And then there was the timeline of events leading to Gabby's death and Brian's return to Florida alone. On August 27th, Gabby sent her last known text to her mom at 7:00 p.m., in which she mentions the strains between her and Brian's relationship and that he had been camping outside. Furthermore, the FBI was able to determine that there was activity on her laptop until around 8:30 p.m., organizing files, indicating she was alive till then. But after that, there was nothing. No messages, no computer activity, no signs of life. The next morning, on August 28th, Brian left Spread Creek alone and headed north, straight to Coulter Bay, Florida. On the way, he spent 55 minutes on the phone with his parents. His father then proceeded to call a lawyer, who then received a $25,000 payment. Phone records and GPS data show that while out on his own in Coulter Bay, Brian sent multiple affectionate messages to Gabby's phone, which was located back in the van. He then got a ride from Miranda Baker and eventually Norma, dropping him back at Spread Creek. It was only when Brian and his phone arrived back at the van that those messages he sent to Gabby's phone were read and response messages were sent to his phone. As FBI Special Agent Loretta Bush explains, Brian was holding both phones and talking directly to himself. It was apparent that he was trying to create an alibi. On August 30th, he left Wyoming and drove Gabby's van back to Florida. On the way, he used Gabby's phone to send that now infamous Stan message to Gabby's mother. He even used her credit card to buy fuel and used her account to make a $700 Zelle payment to himself with a note saying, "Goodbye, Brian. I'll never ask you for anything." The pieces were adding up, and not in favor of the narrative written in Brian's confession. Not to mention Gabby's text to her mother and her activity on her laptop suggest that she was in the van until 8:30 p.m., which means that they weren't running through the wilderness trying to make it back to the camper before it got dark, like Brian's letter says. So, Reddit's theory that Brian's description of Gabby's death is based on lies is most likely correct. However, a minority of Redditors don't believe that his letter was written in an attempt to obfuscate the truth of Gabby's death, but also his own. It is still possible that he intentionally left his belongings there so that people would think he's dead and stop looking for him. I don't think it's a stretch to guess that he still may be alive and hiding out somewhere. Some people have a strong feeling that Brian planted the skeletal remains, the letter, and his belongings to stage his own death. I hope someone eventually finds him, because there is no doubt in my mind that he's out there somewhere. So many isolated, sparsely populated places in the world to hide and not be spotted, when you actually think about it. This feeling that the death was faked primarily comes from two pieces of misconception regarding his remains. The first is that people find it suspicious that Brian's body was decomposed to the point that only bones remained. After all, Gabby's body was still recognizable and it had been exposed to the elements longer than Brian's. However, this is easily explained by the fact that Brian's remains were submerged underwater in a climate of high temperature and humidity, which speeds up decomposition considerably. Not only that, but according to the autopsy report, the bones all showed signs of carnivore predation activity characterized by gnawing and chewing. The other misconception is that the nearly complete skeletal remains were identified as his solely through dental records, which according to some opinions could easily be faked. Regardless of whether or not his dental records could be faked, it does not matter. This is because, according to the autopsy report, DNA analysis was also conducted on the left distal and proximal femur, and the results came back as a positive identification. So this Reddit theory that Brian faked his own death is completely untrue. He is dead, and that's that. While the majority of Redditors seem to understand this, there are many that theorize that the true nature of his death is not what it seems. Maybe his parents actually killed him and left all those notes in a waterproof bag to make it look like he ended his life. While it seems far-fetched, there are a surprising number of people online who, to this day, believe that Brian's parents ended their own son's life. I have thoughts on his death that aren't necessarily the accepted narrative. I don't think he had the nerve to do it himself. I don't think that's why he went to the woods. I feel the dad knew where to go for reasons. Gabby's mother has even publicly admitted to believing in this theory herself, sharing her suspicion in a recent interview.
And I will say straightforward, I don't think he killed himself. I think either his father did or she did. I have no problem saying that. That's just my opinion.
One of the reasons often cited by Redditors who found Brian's death suspicious is the apparent speed at which his remains and belongings were found once his parents arrived to aid in the search. So there's no record of him being in that house. They did find him rather quickly. Makes you wonder, would they have offed him? After weeks of searching, the FBI, with its ample resources, couldn't find Brian, but the moment his parents joined the search, he's discovered. However, when you consider the timeline of events, this can also be easily explained. When the hunt for Brian began, the park was flooded, closed to the public, and extremely hard to search. When the water receded, law enforcement was able to investigate properly, and at the same time, the laundries were also able to join in the search. There is nothing to suggest that Brian wouldn't have been found just as quickly that day without his parents being there. But the other reason for this speculation, aside from the laundry's shady behavior during the investigation, comes from a question. How can law enforcement confidently determine that Brian's death was self-inflicted? Well, if we look at the autopsy report, a heavily rusted revolver containing 2 live rounds and 1 spent round of ammunition was found with the remains. The fired bullet was found approximately 50 feet away, and skull fractures show that the bullet trajectory was left to right, very slightly upward, and having little to no significant front-back deviation. All of this is consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot head wound. Except for one thing. Despite the fact that the gun was determined to have been fired from his left side, according to Brian's sister and confirmations from the autopsy, Brian was right-hand dominant. Retired FBI agent of 25 years, Jennifer Coffindaffer, commented on this discrepancy in an interview with WFLA News Channel 8, saying, "That was bothersome because it does not fit with a right-handed person ending their life." So then she offered 3 possible explanations for this. 1. Brian was ambidextrous. 2. He was holding something else such as a picture in his right hand at the same time. 3. The gun was held by someone else. She further clarified, saying, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I cannot ignore the facts, nor can I ignore statistics, and statistics would say a predominantly right-handed person does not end their life with their left hand. To me, the case doesn't end because it ends with a question mark. How or why did he use his non-dominant hand?" Despite this concerning piece of information, there is currently no evidence available to the public that suggests anyone other than Brian could have been there in the park that day to pull the trigger. Therefore, we will be trusting the medical examiner's conclusion that the death was self-inflicted. That being said, it is fair to say that how or why the gun was fired on Brian's left side is currently an unsolved mystery. But Reddit's reasons for being suspicious of the laundry parents don't end here. It was eventually revealed that back when the FBI had inspected the laundry house after Gabby's remains had been found, they discovered something concerning among Brian's belongings that had originally been in the van. It was a letter from his mother, Roberta Laundrie. It was undated and marked with the phrase, "Burn after reading." It began innocently enough, "You are my boy. Nothing can make me stop loving you. Nothing will or could ever divide us, no matter what we do." But what started as wholesome words of affirmation soon took a dark turn. "If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags." Considering the context of the crime her son had recently committed, these particular word choices disturbed people to say the least. Was this some kind of dark, unfortunately timed joke or something else? It all depended on when it was written. Roberta Laundrie claimed the note was written long before the events of August and September and insisted it had nothing to do with Gabby, but Reddit wasn't going to take her word for it. I disagree. Had it not said burn after reading, I'd be able to believe that narrative had it been written before he killed Gabby. The Petito's lawyer, Patrick Riley, seemed to agree. The content of the letter seems to indicate that it was written after Gabby's death. If my belief as to the time it was written is accurate, it shows that at least Roberta Laundrie knew of Gabby's murder before Gabby's body was located. But regardless of how suspicious it seems, since the burn before reading letter was found buried amongst the emptied contents of the van, it is more likely to have been written before Gabby's death and thus is unrelated to the murder. However, that doesn't mean it couldn't be relevant to a case made against the Laundries. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but after actually reading the letter, I'm leaning towards believing that Roberta Laundrie is telling the truth and that this letter was written before Gabby's death. However, I will say, I think regardless of when the letter was written, it shows that Roberta had an enabling attitude towards her son and makes it seem more likely that she would have tried to help him avoid getting in trouble with the law. And as such, the letter was used as evidence in lawsuits against the Laundries. In November 2022, the court approved a $3 million wrongful death settlement in favor of Gabby's family. The Petitos also filed a separate civil suit against the Laundries, claiming that Brian had told them about the murder before he returned home and that they proceeded to tell the Petitos and the public by issuing messages of hope that she would be found. This lawsuit was settled privately for an undisclosed amount, but every dollar recovered went straight into the Gabby Petito Foundation, a foundation that was set up by her parents with the mission of addressing a disturbing issue that came to light during the search for their daughter. During the investigation into Gabby's disappearance, authorities ended up finding the bodies of multiple other missing persons cases. The newlywed couple, Kylan Schultz and Crystal Turner, were found near Moab, Utah, Robert Lowry in the Wyoming Grand Teton National Park, Lauren Cho in Yucca Valley, California, and Joshua Calderon on Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. Had the Gabby Petito case not gained the level of exposure it did, perhaps all these people would have never been found. It also highlighted that by 2020 alone, there were 90,000 active missing person cases. The internet did not take this fact lightly. Why were these cases not investigated with the same vigor as Gabby's? If FBI and other investigative authorities have the means to find and uncover the truth in the Petito case, why were thousands of people still lost? Gabby's family, amidst their grief, acknowledged this disparity. In a press conference, her father, Joseph Petito, stated, "We can't let her name be taken in vain. We need positive stuff. Anything we can do to bring that up and help people, this same type of heightened awareness should be continued for everyone." He wasn't just talking about his daughter anymore. He was talking about every missing person who never got their moment in the spotlight. In response, the Petito family launched the Gabby Petito Foundation, an organization designed to support searches for missing people, especially those in overlooked communities, and help survivors of domestic violence find safety and support. The mods of R. Gabby Petito created a thread to share cases like these. The R. Gabby Petito moderator, Sun Tzu, also said, "I would hope that people use this enthusiasm, passion, interest, curiosity, whatever it is, to support search and rescue organizations nationwide and share other missing persons information far and wide." Gabby's name was no longer just a headline. It became a lifeline, a legacy fund that was born from grief but built for hope. Also, in 2024, Florida enacted the Gabby Petito Act, a law directly inspired by Gabby's tragic death. Now, officers responding to domestic violence calls are required to conduct a lethality assessment by asking a standardized set of 12 questions. This was a law that might have saved Gabby, but was now protecting others in her name. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you would like to show your appreciation to all of the people in the credits who work full-time to make this possible, then consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. It's the best thing you can do to help us keep making more videos, like this one about how a woman was found baked alive inside an oven at Walmart, and how the police are refusing to talk. Click the video on your screen to watch now.